Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County presents Change Lives for Good with your host, Greg Kefferly.
In the early hours of the morning of President's Day, Coyote Creek flooded, causing 14,000 people to flee their homes in San Jose. Most have been able to return home, but many are still living in temporary housing. Some are homeless. Many are having struggles with transportation, with jobs, trying to make ends meet, and dealing with the stress of everyday life compounded by the disaster. Hello and welcome to Change Lives for Good. I'm your host, Greg Kepferly, CEO of Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County. And today we're talking about the Coyote Creek flood, how to respond to the disaster, and how to prepare ourselves for the next big one. With me are Anna Swardensky from Cadre, Collaborating Agencies Disaster Relief Effort, and Lindsay Caldwell, who's our Program Manager at Catholic Charities for Catholic Charities Disaster Recovery Services. So Anna and Lindsay, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So Anna, tell us what the Collaborating Agencies Disaster Relief Effort does. What does Cadre do when a disaster strikes? How do you prepare, and what did you do for the flood survivors?
Sure, thank you. Cadre, the Collaborating Agencies Disaster Relief Effort, is a network of nonprofit, community, and faith-based organizations here in Santa Clara County. And we work with all those organizations in partnership with local government to help them prepare for and respond to an emergency or disaster when it strikes our community. And so for the Coyote Creek flooding, what we worked with at the request of the City of San Jose, the Cadre network was activated to assist San Jose with the coordination of the nonprofit community resources. And so beginning on Friday, we had a conference call with a number of our lead coordinating agencies and helped them to understand that the city was going to be setting up a local assistance center. And we worked with our membership to help get those organizations there so the community that needed their services could avail themselves of that.
So when you organize Cadre with all of these nonprofits that are part of it, you have a specific structure that you divide them up into teams. Can you tell us about how that works?
Sure. Cadre works, and we have some of what we call coordinating agencies. In particular, for this event, we had 4 coordinating agencies working to help our community figure out the resources that were needed for our disability populations, for instance, what we call access and functional needs. And we have a lead agency here in Santa Clara County called the Silicon Valley Independent Living Center, and so they serve as the coordinator of that team. For donations and coordination, donations management, we work really closely with the Goodwill of Silicon Valley and the Salvation Army. And for food, the Second Harvest Food Bank serves as the lead for our food team, and then Catholic Charities has stepped up to serve as the lead for disaster client casework and case management.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So Lindsay, so she was saying the role of Catholic Charities with case management. So what did Catholic Charities do when the disaster struck, and how do we organize ourselves with case management and the other services that you're providing?
Right, so Catholic Charities in and of itself actually has a lot of the framework in place for case management. So it really was a good fit for Catholic Charities to come on board and start doing some of that initial assessment of people that were really affected by this flood. So what that looks like currently is we have been working with families that have been referred to us through the Red Cross. They came on board as the first responders, and we were right behind them working with clients and assessing the various needs that they have, many of which the first need was homes and shelter. And so we've been working and finding them appropriate housing, temporary housing to permanent housing, many of which have the hope to return to that formerly flooded property.
So with the housing, that was in partnership with the City of San Jose. where they came and asked Catholic Charities, can you help with this housing effort? So how does the housing effort, which is a huge challenge right now, as I understanding that so many people need that temporary housing, how does that dovetail with case management, and what does case management mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a team of staff right now who have skills in case management. So what that means is they're coming alongside clients. They're even speaking the native language of many of our clients who were affected in assessing their needs, going over their budget, seeing what they can afford as we work with them to help them find that housing. But it doesn't just stop there. We're actually working to see what are some of their transportation needs, what are some of maybe they have some trauma that they've experienced through this. So where can we come alongside them, assess their needs? And the goal of our case management is self-sufficiency. So we want to help these families get back to a normal functioning way of life.
So, and that's wonderful as I think about, so many families who need our help, who need the community's help. But really, it's about them getting back to where they were before, and hopefully in a better place, recovering through this trauma to a better place in the community. So as we think about all of this, it takes a lot of work with a lot of different organizations, and so maybe Anna, you can tell us how Cadre works with the government agencies. You were saying the city of San Jose asked Cadre to step up and organize the nonprofit. So how does Cadre work, not just with the nonprofit community, but with government agencies?
Sure. Cadre is what's called the local Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, the local VOAD entity here, which exists in all of our communities. And so with government, what happens when a disaster strikes is they're standing up all of their resources to respond to the different impacts that have been seen by that disaster, the roads that were damaged, the buildings, and getting people to safety. The way in which Cadre works with local government is to really focus on how we can support what's called mass care, the sheltering, the feeding, the human needs that people have after they've experienced some type of emergency or disaster. And so the way we do that is we bring together our membership and open the door to all of the resources in our community to hear what has happened in our affected communities, in this case San Jose, and we bring them together usually in a face-to-face meeting, and our government representatives will tell us, this is what happened, this is what we know, these are the impacts, and then we'll ask our community what resources do they have to help with some of those needs, and also what needs are they seeing as well.
Right, so when you bring these organizations together, of course it includes the traditional disaster response organizations like American Red Cross, Salvation Army, who were just so grateful. They stepped up right away. They did their work very efficiently and professionally and compassionately, and that was a great partnership with them. And at the same time, you rely on bringing together local nonprofits. So what are some of the local nonprofits that are part of Cadre, and then maybe some that haven't been part of Cadre but are now helping in the disaster response?
Sure. That's actually, there's a couple of ways, a couple of questions in there. Cadre's membership does include a lot of the traditional disaster relief organizations like Red Cross, Salvation Army, but we also, in this flood example, for instance, there were homes that were damaged, and so as part of our initial conversations, we knew there was cleanup work that needed to be done. So there's a group here called Team Rubicon, a veterans group that came in to help with what they call muck out, and getting all of the damaged goods out of homes. Following their help were the California Southern Baptist to come in and help. And as we were cleaning up properties and they were moving them into repairs and rebuilding, we had other local nonprofits. Our Habitat for Humanity of the East Bay and Silicon Valley assisted, as did Rebuilding Silicon Valley. Those two in particular were not former members of Cadre, hadn't been really active with us, but we welcomed them into the fold. On the human needs side, we had the Vietnamese community in the Rock Springs neighborhood especially had both affected populations but also some really wonderful service organizations that hadn't previously been connected with us as a Cadre network, and they were welcomed into our coordination efforts and connected with the other nonprofits, the shelters, the mental health providers, the donations and things like that.
So it's really wonderful that Cadre includes all of these groups, and especially it's important that we're including organizations from the communities that are affected. So from the Vietnamese community, groups like Vivo and ICANN. We also have a long-time traditional partner from the Tzu Chi Foundation, which also has that language and cultural capacity, which is so essential in a disaster that's affecting predominantly Vietnamese communities, and so that's been great to have that partnership get strengthened, even in this situation of crisis. I always say never let a terrible crisis go without turning it into some sort of opportunity to rebuild the community and help us become stronger. We'll be back in a moment with continued conversation on how we respond to the flood and how we prepare for the big one. Hello and welcome back to Change Lives for Good. I'm your host, Greg Kepferly, CEO of Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County. And today we're talking about the issue of the Coyote Creek flood and disaster relief and recovery and how we can prepare for the next big one. So Lindsay, as you're working with many of these families and you're seeing their needs firsthand, and you're seeing the struggles that they're going through, what are some of the types of situations that you're seeing these families are in? Can you tell us about that?
Right. So one of the things that needs to be mentioned is the areas that were impacted were some of the more vulnerable populations as well. And so we've seen families that are single parent families, and that's the only caretaker, and they need to go back to work, and the children are now displaced in different areas, and so that affects their schooling. We've also seen, we have many clients who are actually seniors, and they don't have a caretaker, and so there's been concern. So that's the area where Catholic Charities has really been able to come alongside these families and support them. We are so grateful for the community that we've been working with. We actually had one family who was getting ready to, outside of the community, who was getting ready to sell their house, and after the Coyote Creek flood happened, they actually lent out their house for a family to move into, and so we currently have one of our families living in that house, and we are really grateful for the support of the City of San Jose and the way that community members have responded.
That's wonderful. So as you think about those needs that you're seeing, the example of the single moms, the seniors, the families that need housing, what is it that you're seeing are the greatest needs in the community, and how can the community best respond?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, there's many needs, but I think right now at the forefront where we see the greatest need is in housing and finding affordable housing for these families. So we've been placing families out of the shelter into hotels and into temporary apartments. So we've been working with landlords in the area, which has been a great partnership where Catholic Charities has been able to do month-to-month leases with them, sign master leases. So we would love to see more landlords come on board with us so that we can really partner and assist these families with temporary housing until their formerly flooded property is restored, or we can find them permanent housing as well.
That's great. And so housing is the number one need.
Right.
But as you're looking for housing, you're also uncovering other needs.
Absolutely. And so I would say our second greatest need right now is transportation. So many of the families lost their cars, and we're actually seeing that even people that necessarily weren't living in these the area that was impacted by the flood, business owners, people that were visiting, they also lost their cars. And so we've been partnering with different dealerships in the area, as well as Goodwill. And Goodwill is accepting car donations. We would love for more people to donate cars to Goodwill, and then Catholic Charities has been able to come on board and distribute those through private donors. So the community could come on board by donating cars to Goodwill. They could send monetary donations as well, so that we can really assist these families in housing and transportation currently.
Right, and just some wonderful news is that the Auto Dealers Association of Silicon Valley stepped up with a major donation of $100,000, and the Rotary Club downtown San Jose came up with a donation of $35,000 for 10 cars at Mission Valley Ford that they're going to provide for flood survivors. So it's really great that the community really is pulling together, both the landlords that have been so generous with their apartments, as well as individual donors with their cars and the car dealerships. 61 car dealerships have signed on to this, which is really, really amazing. So it's not just the nonprofit community, it's not just the government, it's the entire community that's stepping up, which is really encouraging. So that's good. And as we think about this type of disaster, where as terrible as it is, I have to say I am so grateful. Number one, nobody was killed. Number two, nobody was injured. Number three, only one building was reg tagged, which means it was completely uninhabitable. So most of the buildings they're able to move back into with repairs. Yes, it's painful, it's costly, it's frustrating, but we're actually fairly fortunate as disasters go.
Right.
My big worry, and I think a lot of people's worry in California, especially in the Bay Area, is are we really prepared for the next big disaster, which is more likely to be an earthquake? And so that's where I want to ask Anna with Cadre of, okay, how do we make sure that the nonprofit community and the community as a whole is ready to respond in the case of an even greater disaster than what we're seeing now?
Sure. So with Cadre, one of the things we do in non-disaster times is we host preparedness and education sessions for the nonprofit and faith-based groups to build a plan for their own organization, to build what we call disaster resilience, so that they are ready to keep their services up and running ideally, and that their staff are prepared to not only take care of their own families and loved ones, but be back at work to assist the community with its own relief and recovery types of services. So we put on workshops and trainings. We provide technical planning assistance to the nonprofit sector, and then we host exercises and training forums where we bring folks together to practice what might happen. And certainly a lot of those efforts have paid off for our San Jose event when we brought our community together. In the very first meeting, with just 2 days' notice, we had over 55 folks and organizations in a room saying, how can we help, and how can we help rebuild our community?
Yeah, and as one of the Cadre members, I just have to say that Catholic Charities was really grateful for the training that we received early on. Several years ago, we needed to develop our own continuity of operations plan to say, okay, when a disaster strikes, how do we make sure our own organization is going to be okay? How do we make sure our employees are okay, their families are okay? And so when the flood hit, we were calling around with our managers, making sure not only were our clients okay, but were our staff in any of the flood zones, and assuring their safety first. It's like, you know, when they say on the airplane, put on your own oxygen mask first, right? And then once we did that, we were then ready to move on to our next role with Cadre to help at the next phase. So the more prepared each organization and each family is, the more we'll be ready as an entire community.
Absolutely.
So I want to ask both of you. You're both smart, passionate advocates, and you're calm in disaster, which is a good thing. What's motivated to get you involved in this type of emergency response? Yeah.
That's a funny question I haven't thought about in quite a number of years. Actually, my first experience with disasters was here in Santa Clara County, and I worked on the 10th floor of an 11-story building in downtown San Jose during the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. And I had to exit that building off a stairwell attached to the outside. It was quite frightening, and I think ever since then I've become what we call a disaster geek, and felt like I needed to be more prepared, and how could I help?
Yeah, yes, I too remember the '89 quake. So the Loma Prieta earthquake was a very life-changing experience for many people in the area. So Lindsay, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think for me, I've had the experience where I've traveled to many different countries to assist with natural disasters, and many people during these times, they've lost everything, and there's that loss of sense and hope. And so I think what really drives me is to be able to come in and to bring back that dignity that they feel like they may have lost when they lost all other things, and to be able to walk alongside them and restore that hope. And I think with this flood, it wasn't that we needed to travel outside of our community or the country, but it was right here. And so that's where the passion of helping our own community really drives why I do what I do.
Yeah.
And I had another, thought too to share, and that is, I think where my passion comes in is in helping to bring together the various facets of community resources. I think it's just so important that we know one another and can work together ahead of time to better prepare for an emergency. So how do we maximize the resources of our faith-based, our nonprofit sector, and work in partnership with our government responders for a more coordinated effort?
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I truly believe that as a community working together, we're stronger. So it takes the government sector, and the city of San Jose stepped up right away, and they've been terrific. It takes the philanthropic community. So Silicon Valley Community Foundation stepped up, and also the major donors, even from Los Angeles, right? Major donor from Los Angeles stepping up to help the Vietnamese community, and then the corporate sector stepping in with their own philanthropy, and of course individual donors, all the volunteers that have stepped up to help, and of course the nonprofit agencies and the communities who were affected themselves, helping themselves and helping each other. It's for me, it's a sense of we can overcome these disasters and become a stronger community when we help each other like this.
Absolutely.
So I just have to say I'm so grateful for the work that both of you are doing, and want to thank you for changing lives for good. So this has been Change Lives for Good. Remember, until next time, to speak up, reach out, and change lives for good.